All right, everybody. Today on the podcast, we have Jordan Mercier. Jordan is the news director for the My Broadcasting Network. He founded the MNC Podcast Productions and is host of PTBO Today Live and the Jordan Mercier Podcast, where Jordan covers the latest in sports news and pop culture. So let's welcome Jordan to the show. Jordan, welcome.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. I'm glad that we were able to connect.
Yeah, man, reconnect. I had a fun appearance there on your podcast talking a little baseball to start the year. So I figured I'd return the favor here, get you, on the podcast, cover a little hockey.
I love it. And you know what? Always come to me. If you need the stereotypical Canadian to do hockey talk, like I'm your guy.
Awesome. That's what I love to hear. So last podcast, we went overseas to Germany. Now this one, we're going up north to Canada. So we're awesome and happy to have Jordan here on the podcast. So Jordan, the 2022 NHL playoffs. I think it's going to be a big one. But first question, do you think the Cup's going to finally come home to Canada?
Oh, that's a great question. Of course, it hasn't happened since 1993, Chris. It's been since 1993. No Canadian team has won, and that was the Montreal Canadiens, who were back in the final a year ago. I don't know if this is the year. I was sort of cautiously optimistic as Calgary. But the Western Conference, I mean, you got to go through a pretty good team in Colorado in order to get there. But I like the makeup of their team to make it to the final more than perhaps the Edmonton Oilers or the Toronto Maple Leafs. But they've also, Dallas has been able to put up a heck of a fight against them. So I don't know. You know what? If we're going down to just three teams against the field, I'm probably going to say that it's going to stay south of the 49th parallel. That would be my guess anyways. The teams that I like are just a notch or two above those from Canada.
Yeah, I know. I heard a lot of people hyping the Leafs this year, thinking it might be the year. They're in a severe drought. It's been since 1967. They've got to hoist the cup. Like you said, Edmonton's 1990, Calgary 1989, then the Canadians, who aren't in the playoffs this year, but we'll kind of see. Now looking at last year, we had the Lightning race their back-to-back Stanley Cups. Do you think this could be a possible three-peat where they're looking at the Islanders territory, or maybe they have a little bit of burnout after winning two cups in that small window?
Listen, in my opinion, and it just goes to show you the great framework around Tampa Bay, which even before they won their back-to-back cups, they had a 62-win season, which was a record tire. They appeared in the Cup final, I think 2015. They were in the Eastern Conference final and lost to Pittsburgh a couple of times as well. So this is a team that has been just extremely well put together. And it started with Steve Yzerman as general manager, and now it's just sort of continued after he went back to Detroit. But Tampa Bay, in my opinion, is as well positioned to win three straight Stanley Cups that we've seen since the New York Islanders. The Red Wings won back-to-back in the late 90s and made it to the second round on their attempt to a three-peat. But that team felt old, really old. Pittsburgh, I think by the time they had won back-to-back in 16 and 17, I mean, they felt like they were sort of out of gas. So I never really had that sort of expectation. Tampa Bay is still really good. Their key players are far from being long in the tooth. They've got, in my opinion, the best goalie in the world. Toronto is a very good team. This is a 50-win team. This is a 105-point team. So it's one of those things. It's like if we were to get a baseball analogy, it would be like the American League East for those years in the early 2000s, where it's just like, wow, every team like 1, 2, 3, and 4 are really, really good. And it always ends up with two really good teams having to play early in the playoffs, which is what we're seeing with Toronto and Tampa Bay. But Tampa Bay is a marvel to watch, and I think they have the best coach in the league in John Cooper too. So it would not shock me if they go really deep.
Yeah, so I think they have a kind of a tough draw here, getting Toronto in the first round and currently down 2-1 in that series. If they are able to advance past Toronto, they're looking at the winner of Florida and Washington. And personally, of course, I'm going for the Bruins. I'm a Boston guy. I got the Celtics jersey on today. So we'll see how that series goes. But personally, I'm going for Joe Thornton. I want him to get a cup. He's been a key cog for that Florida team. I think his veteran presence has helped it get to where it's at this year. Do you think that they could get past Florida in the second round?
I think I would take Tampa Bay in that series, just because of the prove it factor, right? Tampa Bay's been there. They've been through the battles. Florida, they've had a competitive team the last number of years, lost to Tampa Bay a year ago. I love the Joe Thornton thing too, because there's not many players from the 1990s who are still playing. I think there's Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, and Zdeno Chara. Those are sort of the three from, I think, the class of 96 or 97. Just remarkable that he's even still able to kind of get in the lineup. So I always love those feel-good stories. I mean, you're a Boston guy. It didn't happen with the Bruins, but we sort of saw it with Ray Bourque, right, with Colorado, where he wins at the end of his career.
Yep.
It would be cool. And I really like Florida to be competitive. I'm not sure if they've won a playoff round since they made it to the finals in 96. So it's been a pretty long drought for them too.
Yeah.
But if they were going mano a mano with the Tampa Bay Lightning, I mean, de facto says I would take Tampa Bay probably in that series.
Okay. Yeah. So are you thinking Lightning could possibly go to the Eastern Conference Finals then?
I think you know what? I think the winner of Toronto Tampa Bay for sure goes to the conference final and would become sort of my look at potentially the favorite. That's not to disregard what happens in the Metropolitan Division. I think there's some really good teams. I think Carolina's, pretty good. And we've seen that early in their series with Boston. I think the New York Rangers have always been a bit of a dark horse for me, just because Igor Shesterkin has been at times historically good this year. His save percentage was around .940 for most of the season, fell off a little bit near the end, but he's a legit MVP contender, which you don't see from goalies very often. And they, of course, have Artemi Panarin and a great coach in Gerard Gallant. So I do a bunch of playoff hockey pools, and I sort of pick which teams that I don't think a lot of people are going to load up on. So I knew Colorado, I knew Tampa. I've got some Rangers in my lineups for futures. So I would like the Rangers to go on a little bit of a deep run.
Now, in any of those pools, did you happen to pick the Bruins beating the Hurricanes?
You know what? No, I didn't think so.
That's okay.
I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought that was an iffy matchup for them, but it's interesting, and you're certainly based there, so you can give me a little bit more perspective. But I've seen over social media through the first two games. Now, they were able to respond, which was nice. But there were some people who were kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, hey, for this team, is maybe that window closed? I mean, they made it to the final in 2019. They made it to the final in 2013. They've been really competitive and a Stanley Cup contender for basically 12 or 13 years. It's been a pretty nice run for them.
Yeah, it's been a great run. I've enjoyed it because, like, growing up in it, like pretty much coming along when they won 2011. I mean, I've been a Bruins fan my whole life. As a kid, I went to practices. I met Joe Thornton. That's why he's like, I'm rooting for him. But that's was one thing I was going to get to with you. I think that window definitely is shutting. They got the early cup, but then to go to two more, not win another one since, in the last 11 years is tough, because they had started off so hot, winning that cup early, beating Vancouver, and have kind of been still a top team in the East, made those appearances, but just can't get over the hump and win another one.
It's amazing. I was actually talking on the show about this, that in my mind, there are two teams that have been really good, really competitive, and made it to a lot of cup finals. But between Philadelphia and Boston, they've only won the one cup in the last 50 years. The Flyers haven't won since 75. You mentioned the Bruins win in 2011. And that to me blew me away, because, I mean, the Bruins, even before this most recent run, they made it in 88. They made it in 90. I think the Flyers were there in 80, 85, 87, 97, 2010. Yeah. It's just amazing that those two programs, especially when I think about how competitive and some of the great marquee players they have, that it just, and I think if anything, that just goes to show you that there are a lot of really great teams that it's the hardest trophy to win in sports. So there's a lot of variables. You have to deal with injuries. There's all that kind of stuff. And it is a grind. And then you look at some of the other great teams for like a 5-year window, some team like San Jose, who would win 50 games every year. And, they made it to one and lost and were, a bunch of early exits. So it just goes to show you that sometimes it's kind of the path needs to be cleared for you too, right? You need to play the right teams in order to win the championship. And it hasn't happened. But the Bruins have been such a staple franchise. They've been so good. They've drafted well. They've had a lot of players. Patrice Bergeron, one of my favorites of all time for what he brings to the table. Even before that, in the era of Lucic, who is still playing in Calgary. And it's been fun to watch. But yeah, you start to wonder if, Rask out the door now. We know Char's gone. Bergeron's still good, but a little bit older. You got some, Pasternak's really good, but I mean, at what point do you flip the switch and say, okay, it's probably better that we kind of start looking at other options?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this will be a weird offseason too, because Bergeron's going to be a free agent.
Yeah.
I don't want him to go to another team. I think he should be a Bruin forever. But again, it's going to be tough decisions for them. That kind of leads into my next question a little bit, Jordan. I kind of feel like this playoffs is sort of a passing of the torch playoffs. You got kind of the Bruins and the Canes, kind of Canes now supplanting the Bruins. You have the Oilers kind of going past the Kings, the Wild getting past the Blues, the Caps and the Panthers, like all these teams, the Penguins and the Rangers, those other teams that have been in the playoffs so much, winning cups, the Caps, the Bruins, the Penguins, the Kings, those teams are kind of passing the torch now to these younger up and coming teams.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a very fair point to look at. And even out west, when you look at a team like Colorado's been sort of knocking on the door for a little bit, they had almost a historically good season with what they were able to do. But yeah, I agree with you. It really does feel, especially if a Florida can get rid of Washington, especially if the Rangers can beat Pittsburgh. And then you start wondering, even if you're a Penguins fan, you've got Malkin, you've got Crosby, a bunch of sort of disappointments after their back-to-back cups. I mean, at what point I can't see that they would get rid of Crosby. Maybe Malkin's a piece that you consider getting rid of to look towards the future a little bit more. But you're totally right. And if anything, I know this is an old adage for people who hate fighting in hockey. They always say like, when you get to the playoffs, there's no fighting. But there's been plenty of fighting. As a matter of fact, I've seen a couple of line brawls, and I love it, to be honest with you.
It kind of fired up the Bruins a little bit, getting chippy. Pasternak had the run in with their goalie. Now he's out, and then Lindholm just got blasted. Like, that was a rough one. I wasn't happy with that, but it was a clean hit. Not too much you can do. So looking at the game so far, Jordan, who do you think's been the most dominant team so far?
The most dominant team to me, albeit they lost their opener. I mean, Edmonton has really been decisively better than LA, which I think most people probably would have expected. I think LA overachieved a little bit. And Edmonton is always the perennial disappointing team. I mean, you've got Connor McDavid and you've got Leon Draisaitl, and then it's sort of a huge drop off for the rest of talent. But they're a team that everyone looks at every year thinking, like, how can they not go deep in the playoffs? It looks like they've found their groove a little bit against the LA Kings. But I will point to the Toronto Maple Leafs too, not for CanCon bias here, but they've been really, really good. They played about as good a hockey game in game one against Tampa Bay. And you could say, well, Tampa Bay looked a little old and slow and disinterested. But I think a lot of that had to do with how well Toronto played. And the biggest wild card for the Leafs was Jack Campbell getting the opportunity to be a playoff goalie for basically the first time. We haven't seen that. And he's played really well. When they won in game 3 to steal home ice advantage back, he was outstanding. I think he made a huge save early in the game and was able to weather the storm when Tampa Bay made it 3-2 with about 14 minutes left in the third period. So for them to hold on, I think was huge confidence-wise. And the Leafs getting contributions up and down the lineup too. It hasn't just been the Marner and Matthews show. So they've really, really, really looked good early on in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think if the Leafs can get past the Lightning, this might be this postseason where everything comes together for them finally. Like, they finally paid out those big contracts, and now you're finally seeing it all come together for the Leafs. And the Lightning are a huge test, and if they can get past it, it could be like a prove-it game, and getting past the Lightning could give them all the momentum to go all the way to the Stanley Cup final.
Well, I mean, that's certainly, it's sort of cup or bust at this point for the fan base who've been starved. It didn't matter. Matthews scored 60 goals, franchise record. They set a franchise record for wins and points. Doesn't matter if they don't go far in the playoffs. I mean, they haven't been to a conference final since 2002, so you're going back more than 2 decades. They haven't even been past the first round of the playoffs since 2004, if you can imagine that. So it's been that long. And yeah, no, it's definitely a star fan base. People still concerned maybe a little bit about the defense, but they picked up Mark Giordano. He seemed to slide in really well. Jack Campbell, I think, has played better probably than most people had expected. And you're right. If the stars align, and even though Boston might not be what it is, there's still very much a hesitation for the fan base in Toronto that they don't want to play Boston. They've been beaten and eliminated by them in dramatic fashion a whole bunch of times. So if they can avoid them, slide into maybe a Carolina, you get a Florida at some point. I just, top to bottom, they're a really, really good team.
Yeah, that series, I think it was 2013 where they went game 7 and the Bruins came back from down like 3 goals.
It was 4-1 with, I think, 10 minutes left in the third period. And that still gets brought up that's one of my favorite, you got certain moments that you YouTube and you're like, there's no way that happened. Whether it was like the Pats Falcons Super Bowl where I'm like, okay, I really need to watch this again because I don't understand how this happened. That Bruins game 7 against Toronto is one of those ones that I go to all the time.
Unreal. So Jordan, now there's a lot of names in the playoffs. Like you said, Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews. Who's maybe an under the radar guy you could see having a good playoff run and making a name for himself?
Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier with the New York Rangers, I mean, he is a star. Artemi Panarin, he came in with Chicago. He had some success right away. He is a really, really good hockey player. And I think he was sniffing around 100 points this year for New York. So he's somebody that I've definitely sort of kept my mind to. In Colorado, they have such talent up and down the roster. And Nathan MacKinnon, for a lot of people, for a couple of years, and then he battled some injuries. But He was kind of running not McDavid level, but just like an inch or two below.
It was like
He's one of my he's one of my favorite players to watch top to bottom would be Connor McDavid. If you look at defense, this year was remarkable for defense. You had Roman Josi in Nashville, who's not going to hang around too long in the playoffs, but he almost gets 100 points. You've got Victor Hedman for Tampa Bay, who, in my opinion, is the best overall defenseman in the league. He just controls the game and the way it goes. But I think for the National Hockey League, you talk about changing of the guard a little bit. It's not just teams, it's personnel too. When you look at some of these newly developed stars that are kind of coming in, and then you go to, you still got Ovechkin and Crosby, and you still have McDavid, of course, but there's some very exciting new names that I think a whole generation of hockey fans are just sort of learning who they are.
Yeah, so like with the Avalanche, you got Cal McCarr, and I think the guy too I'm excited to see is Kaprizov with the Wild. I think he's
totally
a special player to watch for sure.
Yeah.
So now we talked a little bit. You said the Rangers might be your dark horse team out of the East. Who do you think it might be your dark horse team out of the West?
Out of the West, I would probably, if I had to pick one. Now, for me in the West, I think sometimes in sports, the best team just wins. And you can conjure up arguments for a bunch. I think Colorado goes to the final because I think they are the best team top to bottom. They are so solid. They're stacked. But if I had to look at another team that I'd go, okay, maybe you wouldn't expect it, is another team that I think has had playoff failures through their tenure. But I do really like, you just mentioned them, the Minnesota Wild. And this is a team that, loses game 1 to St. Louis, and you start looking around going, ooh, this ain't good. And then they've been able to respond really, really strongly against a Blues team that I feel is sort of like their window is definitely, they won the Cup. They were contenders before that, but I feel like there might be a little bit of a change coming there with Tarasenko and crew. But Minnesota is a team that has struck out a lot in the playoffs. And again, like Toronto, could this be the year where they sort of just get the right matchups and play well at the right time? Because they certainly have enough talent on their team to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I like them too, but I think they might have a tough draw too if they hit the Abs in the second round.
Oh, yeah. Whoever plays the Avalanche, I mean, they're going to be decided underdogs for sure.
Yeah, but I now getting to the second round, I'm kind of hypothesizing what could be some second round matchups. So we got the Abs, possibly the Wild, the Flames, the Oilers, Panthers, and either the Lightning or the Leafs, and hopefully the Bruins, but either the Bruins or the Hurricanes, and probably the Rangers. What do you think might be the best second round matchup between those potentials?
Ooh, again, just based on, being in Canada, if you were able to get the Battle of Alberta, which you haven't had since, I would have to look, but probably not since Wayne Gretzky days. Like it probably was like the late 80s, the last time that happened. There is a provincial hatred there. I don't know. It's almost like on a maybe different level, but it would be like a Pittsburgh Philly where there would just be such nastiness. And especially because, in Calgary, you now have a bona fide, like number one, like all-star level MVP candidate in Johnny Gaudreau.
Johnny Rocket.
And you've got some of the faces from yesteryear. Like you do have your Lucic and you do have some of those Edmonton pieces as well. That one I would love to see. Like that I feel would be like super fierce. That would be one that would be super exciting. But if you look back at the East, if there's any way, you end up with sort of a Toronto, Florida. Again, you talk about some of the new faces. You talk about teams that, the interesting thing about Toronto playing against Florida teams is we have what's called snowbirds, where there's people who live in Canada half the year and then they fly down and basically they live in Florida. So I was watching the Tampa Bay game last night and it was a Tampa Bay crowd, but I was looking around and be like, the Leafs are probably fairly comfortable there because there are enough Toronto fans. I feel like Florida, it would be times 2. Like Toronto would totally take over their arena unless they did something where you couldn't buy tickets with a different zip code or something. But I think that would be a lot of fun. That would be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely that Flames Oilers series, though, that would be an intense series. Personally, I'd love to see Bruins Rangers just because my best friends are Rangers fans. So we'd get at it. And I think it'd just be a little chippy series.
Original 6, always good. Can't
always
go wrong.
A classic. Can't go wrong.
Yep.
So now looking at the end of the road, Jordan, who are your 2 teams in the Stanley Cup final and who do you think is going to win it all?
So I had Colorado and the New York Rangers. Though from the get-go, I think Colorado's too good. As I said, it's a lame answer, but I think occasionally, the best team will end up winning. And I think Colorado, this is just sort of the year. When I look at their pieces, Cole Makar, if I said Hedman was the best defenseman in the world, like this guy is as close to being on that same level. He's just absolutely spectacular, and probably shaping up to be, the best player in his draft. And it was awesome. So I think Colorado probably gets the edge. The reason, again, why I'm going with the Rangers was I like some of their marquee pieces. I really like their coach, Gerard Gallant. He coached Vegas when they made it to the final in their inaugural season. And he's just a coach that breeds success in his system. And Igor Shesterkin has the ability to steal you 1 or 2 games in a series, which at some point on your quest to the cup, like you're going to have to win that game where you're outshot 45-16, but somehow win 3-1 because your goalie is just outstanding. And I think the Rangers probably have the best possibility of having that on a consistent basis. So those are the 2 teams that I'm looking at to make it to the Stanley Cup final.
And who do you think is going to win if that's the matchup?
Probably Colorado.
Okay.
I would look at Colorado because I just think top to bottom, they're outstanding, and they've got elite level forwards. They've got elite level defensemen. Goaltending is very good too and very solid. And I feel like they've knocked on the door a little bit. Like it's been struggling. Like they've had McKinnon for a while. It hasn't translated to postseason success, but I feel like this is the year where he's going to, make a lot of believers in a pretty strong run to the Conn Smythe Trophy.
Yeah, and then I know, like I told you, my buddy's a Rangers fan, and just he'd talk all the time about Shesterkin, and then just seeing him play game 1, and he faced 72 shots and saved 69 of them. Like that's nuts. Like, all right, that's something you can see in 2 or 3 games, let alone 1 game. Of course, it went into triple overtime, but still, just that's an amazing save percentage.
Oh yeah, it was he got the second most saves ever in a playoff game, which is it's crazy. It's crazy to think.
Yeah, and then just lastly, Jordan, I don't know if it's you, but I feel like I'm hitting that wall here with sports where I'm starting to feel old because now you have players, the kids of players I watched in the league. You got the Kachuk sons in the league, Ty Domi sons in the league. Same thing in baseball. You got Vlad Guerrero Jr.'s kid in the league. Like, it's nuts. I don't know if you're feeling the same way as me, but hockey's making me feel a little old this year.
Hockey makes me feel extremely old because Sidney Crosby, who was making national news in Canada when he was like 13, 14, everyone's following this guy's career. And then I look and I'm like, oh, okay, he's a 1987. That's not young anymore. Sid the Kid is not young anymore, even though he still looks great. He looks the exact same, and he's still a really good player. But no, you look at him, I see Ovechkin with the gray hair. I know he's a little prematurely gray, but that always makes me feel a little bit iffy. John Tavares right now, who I know was born in 1990. I actually worked when he played for the Oshawa Generals, which was his junior team, and he scored 72 goals in the OHL as a 16-year-old, and I covered it for a local television station. But now I'm looking and I'm like, okay, he's 31, going to be 32, and he's looking like he's slowing down a hair. And again, that's a kid that I've watched really since he was 15. So no, I hear you. You know what? We're getting older, dude. Like, that's just the way it goes.
Nuts, man. Well, Jordan, I appreciate the breakdown of hockey here. I'm sure the fans will enjoy it, but tell everyone where they can hear you and plug all your stuff.
You can hear me a bunch of different places, as you mentioned. So here I'm based in Peterborough, Ontario, which is about 2 hours east of Toronto. We like to use that as a flagpole. So it takes me about 2 hours to get there if I want to go and see the Raptors, the Jays, or the Leafs. So we have a station. It's called Freak 90.5, and there's an afternoon show. It's called PTBO Today Live. It's very locally focused. It's, the hottest topics from around town. We're a city of about 80,000. So you can imagine it's not always the most riveting content.
I'm sure you get some hot topics.
Oh, hugely hot topics. But of course, we've also branched off and started doing our own individual podcasts. So you can check me out, the Jordan Mercier podcast, wherever you do your downloading. And you mentioned MNC Podcast Production. So I started a podcast production company where now I actually produce about 5 or 6, mostly sports geared. However, there are some that range into lifestyle and politics and stuff like that. So you can check it out. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at MNC Podcasts. And one of my favorite ones that we do is called the Capital PTBO. It's actually, we record it live from the Capital PTBO. It's a sporting goods store on George Street. Oh, cool. And I'll give them a plug. You can check it out, capitalptbo.ca, if you want to pay Canadian money for some goods. And he's got just about everything. You can pick up a Red Sox cap or something. But that one's fun because we get to do it on location and the audience comes and we interact, and it's great. Yeah,
I think I checked it out. Was that where you guys were breaking down Guy Lafleur?
Breaking down Guy Lafleur. Yes, we do it every Friday at 4:30. We go live. And then, of course, we post it directly after that. So that's fun.
Awesome. Well, everyone go check out all of Jordan's stuff. Jordan, thank you for joining us, and I'm sure we'll catch up down the road.
This was awesome. And anytime you say the word and I'm here.
Awesome. I appreciate that, man. Have a good one.
You too.